Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll let the rest of the attendees trickle in here, and then we'll get started in just a minute with going over the fun, fast, CSS profile forms. I'm going to assume everybody on here has a 2026 grad. If you don't, feel free maybe, or put in the chat if you don't mind what year your kid is graduating high school, just so we know. I would think everyone's a 26, but I guess we'll see here. Okay.
Looks like it.
As expected. Now, one, this is going to be recorded, so everyone will get an email afterwards with the recording. And then two, if you've got questions as we're going along, please throw those in the Q&A. It's just easier for Michael and myself to address those in the Q&A versus the chat. So that would be helpful. And we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. There's a lot to cover tonight, so quite honestly, I don't know how long this is going to take. We'll see. There's a lot of slides here, so we're going to probably go through a lot of stuff maybe relatively quickly, which again, you'll get the recording. But when you're for the questions too, we got to keep it somewhat general. Any sort of like major specific type situation, just might not be something we can address in this type of a format, but we can on a one-on-one basis as well. So, all right, why don't we get started here? Okay, are we all? You see my
Can
screen,
see it.
right, Mike?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. Now we don't. Oh shoot. Well, maybe we should introduce ourselves first because we forgot that slide. So, as a way of introduction, my name is Dan Maga. I am in the Chicagoland area, and I started working with families back in 2004, helping them figure out how to put their kids through college and helping them with the financial aspect of that. So a little over 20 years of doing this, and then recently joined College Aid Pro a couple years ago. So only with College Aid Pro a couple years, but in the industry working with families, like I said, for 20 years. So been doing this a lot and seeing almost everything. So hopefully, especially with what you can do or mistakes, hopefully you don't make on these forms, that will hopefully help you guys out tonight. And then my partner tonight is Michael Korch. I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everybody. My name's Michael, and I've been with College Aid Pro for, I think this is my third year now, which is pretty amazing. I'm a parent of three. I've got almost 24-year-old and twin 21-year-old girls that are just started their senior year of college. So I'm just a little bit ahead of you guys, maybe. But my background is I spent 32 years in software. The last 5 years, I've been worked a lot in financial planning, kind of traditional financial planning offices, and worked with a lot of families there that were thinking about and worried about, and all the same things that I was worried about, and that you may be thinking about and working on right now as well. As like, how do we make all this fit financially? So I'm happy to be spending time with you tonight, and look forward to answering as many questions as we can.
Okay, let's get started. So, hopefully, here's our mission statement, which is pretty simply to end the student debt crisis by empowering families to shop smarter for college. And we're going to hopefully do some of that tonight with how you're going to fill out these forms, and hopefully doing it in your best interest, not the schools, which ideally is going to increase your potential grants and reduce your out of pocket. Couple tips. Take breaks, save and come back later. You can save this stuff. You don't have to finish it all in one fell swoop. Try not to get too frustrated. I'm hoping that everyone who is on this call tonight, if you're doing this on your own, this is going to be much easier having watched us for the upcoming 60 minutes with some tips and tricks on how to do this. And then In terms of, hopefully all of you have MyCap accounts. If you don't, Mike, if you could put that link into the chat for them to sign up.
Yeah.
We'll go into the software and show you in a little bit how this works, but um, basically this is going to allow you to plug in your personal information, both financial and your students' academics. It's going to calculate your student aid index, and you're going to be able to add the schools that your student is considering applying to. And it's going to tell you not only what those colleges cost, but then what they are going to, or what they should award your student based on grants or scholarships, based on your personal financial information and your students' academic information. So hopefully previewing for you what you could expect in terms of awards from the schools before your student applies, which is going to be critical if you're trying to figure out how to do this within a certain budget. So the software is super powerful. If you haven't already, set up that free account so you can start seeing what these schools might be awarding you before your kids are applying.
Well, let's jump in and just a couple of quick kind of reminder slides, maybe for some of you. Some of you, this might be newer information, but it's good to have this kind of foundation to set up as we move forward and talk about the actual forms that deliver on this now. So what is financial aid? Like when we talk about financial aid at the college level, it's really provides a discount to the sticker price or the cost of attendance of school. So cost of attendance is essentially all the bills that you could be direct billed from the school for tuition, room and board, books and supplies, lab fees, those things that add on and serve as that quarterly or semester bill. So there's kind of three buckets that fall under the umbrella of financial aid. The first two, kind of left to right, are really the ones we want to prioritize because that's the free money. So on the left is the need-based grant. So this is really based on the financial situation, the financial position of the family, income and assets. And then based on that profile, some schools are more generous than other schools. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. The middle bucket is merit-based scholarships. So really doesn't have anything to do with the financial position of the family, but it has to do with the talent profile of the student. Obviously, academics like GPAs and test scores could be that they're really good at throwing a football, or they're an amazing cellist or dancer, an artist. You know, those are all the different type of skill sets that schools want those kiddos on campus, and they're going to be rewarded potentially with a merit-based scholarship. Finally, on the right is this self-help bucket, which doesn't lower the price of school, but may help kind of pay the bill, the school bill. Loans, obviously, like that's going to help pay the bill, but in the end could make school more expensive because it's loans plus interest. Work study, you know, you fill out the FAFSA, every student is eligible for a work study job on campus, which is work a few hours in the library or in the cafeteria. You make kind of a minimum wage that can help to pay some of those bills. So not free money, but might help along the way. Okay, so here's kind of one of a simple equation, simple math that is very universal for things that we'll be talking about tonight. So how do we know if we're going to be potentially eligible for some need-based aid? It's this equation. So what's the cost of attendance or the sticker price? And that's unique to every school, minus something called the student aid index. Now, that's kind of the output of the federal student loan application we'll be talking about tonight, the FAFSA. And not a big long form. If we were to send you all the documentation, it's probably 200-page PDF. There's a lot that goes into it, but the math is pretty simple. It's essentially an index that kind of represents what the colleges and the government think you can pretty much pay annually for one student, like basically 1 year of school. So example is if the school costs $80,000 and your student aid index says the family can pay 20, then there's this gap, this potential for need that's $60,000. And I know when I was touring schools with my twins and I went to some expensive schools and like, whoa, we can only pay this. It costs that. Like there's that big gap. Who pays the gap? Does the school cover that? Do I have to pay 100%? Do we meet in the middle? And of course, the answer is it depends. It depends on the kind of deep pockets of the school and how their business model, frankly. That's the part that we have to know. Like, just don't assume that if your need from the FAFSA comes back that you're eligible for 60,000, it's not automatic that schools are going to pay that 60,000 gap. It's going to vary, and we kind of are on the hook to know that about the different schools. And that's why the MyCap software is really popular, because it kind of answers those questions for all the schools. Okay, so maybe you're a family that has, you know, has more income and assets, and you're on the fence thinking about, I don't know that we're gonna, even if we were to submit the FAFSA, like, we're not going to be eligible probably for very much aid. So why should we even do it in the first place? So we would say you might be surprised, because it's not like tax brackets where all the lines or the demarcation of, hey, if I make more than this amount right here, I probably won't get anything. If I'm under that, like, there's no set line like 100,000 or 150,000 tax bracket. It's kind of the way we think as grown-ups, but the line varies very tremendously based on the different types of schools, and they kind of make up wherever their line is. So don't leave money on the table. Fill out the forms, take the time, do it right, and you might be surprised for some schools. Second is consideration for merit aid. So there are some schools now that, even though, as we said earlier, like, merit is not about the financial position, it's about that talent profile of the student. We're finding that some schools will look, when they're considering a merit award, they're going to look to see if a FAFSA is on file. And if there's not, they kind of take that as a silent kind of notification saying, I guess this family's not really raising their hand if there's any free money, so we're just going to go to the next family. So don't do that. Get that obstacle off the table and, submit the form. Three, maybe your only chance to apply for aid. There are some schools that freshman year is kind of the base year, and decisions are made there. And there are some schools that say, hey, if you don't submit, then we're not going to entertain future requests for aid, or an appeal request if something changes in your financial situation, and which is number four, that consideration of appeals. And finally, number five is, every family, regardless of income and asset levels, high or low, if a FAFSA is filed, your student is eligible for the federal direct student loan. It used to be called the Stafford loan. It's been around for decades. It's a very good student loan. It can help to cover some of that gap. The terms are very reasonable, and it's kind of an automatic. So if you don't fill out the FAFSA, you're not eligible for that type of competitive loan. So that's why you should fill that out.
Only other one I'd add to this too is, and again, this is rare, but there are some schools out there, I would say generally you're like smaller, maybe private liberal arts schools, that will give away like $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 just for people who submit the FAFSA, even if you don't qualify for grants. So again, a lot of reasons you should be submitting this form. We're never going to tell anyone, hey, don't fill out this free form, which could only potentially make money available to you. Now, I'm going to hop into the software real quick just to give you guys a quick preview of kind of how the MyCap software works if you haven't set that up already. So hopefully, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're looking in the software, and this is just a general count, but here you can see, after I plugged in my data, it's telling me my federal SAI, which would be for most of your public schools. Then you've got your institutional SAI, which is for schools that have that additional requirement called the CSS profile on top of the FAFSA. Their calculation is a little bit different, and there can be a range there depending on the college, basically in essence, based on how they look at your home equity. So in this example, if we look at a school like here, we've got Boston College. We click on the school, it's going to give us a little bit more detail in terms of what the COA is, or cost of attendance. That's their sticker price. This is the amount this family should expect in the form of need-based grants. And then their net cost after the grants is on the far right-hand column. So, here's an example where Boston College, obviously one of our more expensive schools, but for this family, it might be more affordable than they initially thought based on the fact they do a great job of providing financial aid versus, Rutgers. For this family, it would be an out-of-state school. And as you can see, maybe a nominal merit-based scholarship, and it could end up actually being more expensive than going to BC, even though it's a public school and less expensive on paper. So the whole point here is though that, once you set up your account and you enter your particular information financially as well as academically, it's going to then help you understand and calculate what these schools are going to cost for you and your student. Or like worst case scenario, Michigan, here's, now we're looking at far more than BC in this example, because we're dealing with a large public school that generally doesn't do as good of a job of providing grants or scholarships. So again, the software is going to be super powerful in terms of helping you calculate that, which would be very difficult to try and do on your own, if not impossible. And keep in mind, you got to plug your information in accurately, though, to get accurate results. A lot of times we'll be reviewing people's profiles and, they just kind of guess at their income or things of that nature. So if you're doing it, take the time, get out your tax return and just put in the 3 or 4 line items that you need. So you know that the SAI that you're calculating is accurate.
Okay, so when we think about the financial aid forms, this is kind of a funny slide, but the takeaway is be honest for where it's asking for special things like home equity, where there's not an expectation you're going to pay to get an appraisal from a realtor or someone for the value of your home. So don't overestimate, don't overshare information. Just be honest about and don't overestimate, and you work to get the best deal, so to speak. And if there's things that are unusual or you're not getting what you want, then there's this concept of the appeal on the back end, so that we can try to make some adjustments in that. So let's talk about the FAFSA. So the FAFSA has gone live. It is now open for business, open and available. You'll see here, there's the link on the screen. It's kind of a long thing. You can also type in fafsa.gov, make sure it's GOV, so you go to the right site. An interesting thing, we talked a little bit about the assessment of the financial position of the families based on income and assets. So for the income, it's not the income for this calendar year or tax year. It's actually prior year based on your student's high school graduation. So for those of you that typed in, like you've got 2026 grads, it's going to -2. So it's going to look at that full 2024 tax year. And that's what is going to be referred to, when it asks for AGI and other information off the tax form. The custodial parent submits the form. So what's that? Custodial parent is essentially the one that is providing the most financial support. Obviously, if you're married, live with your significant other, you're going to file your information almost like, so to speak, like a 1040, like it's all together in one, it's combining the income and assets from the two of you. If you're in a split household, you're divorced, you're separated, you're not living together, there's an opportunity here, a strategic opportunity, and it's about the rules have changed 2 years ago. It used to be, where did this student live for 6 months in a day, or who makes more income? There were different kind of rules. That has changed, and now it's just about what's the parent that provided more financial support from the time the form is submitted backwards 12 months, so kind of this last year. And so there's an opportunity based on that. If you have an amicable type of split and it's 50-50 where you're trying to share those expenses, hey, if a parent makes $400,000 and the other parent makes $50,000, see if the parent that makes $50,000 can spend a little bit more money on the student, and they can, with confidence, then apply as the custodial parent with less income and assets. reported on those forms, there's going to be an opportunity to get more aid from the school, from the institution. Okay, first thing, like, well, how do you get started on the FAFSA? Is you have to create two IDs. There's going to be one ID, a unique login and password for the student. And then, as we were talking about, that custodial parent, or if it's the one parent for the married couple that's going to do the paperwork, so to speak, that's login and password number 2. So you got to create the account. There's a link there. You can also find it if you just go to the FAFSA homepage. You can find the create account link. It can be a small form. You're going to set up your account. Make sure you type in your first name and last name to match what you have for your social security card or your account, because it kind of checks with the IRS real quickly. All right, so, well, who is the contributor on the FAFSA? So contributor can be kind of a loaded word. It's not meant to describe contributing money necessarily. It's really about contributing information. So we talked a little bit about, there's the student that's going to be contributing their information. Here's their income and assets. And then there's going to be that second individual. In most cases, it's going to be one parent, the custodial parent, that's going to provide information for that login number 2. Now, there are some scenarios where potentially both, biological parents are going to be contributors. And you can see some exceptions here in the bullets. I won't go into great details about it, but for example, the second one, parents were married in the prior year. So back in 2024, we were married, but we filed our tax form married filed separately. So essentially there were 2 tax forms. Well, then the assumption is that there's going to be 2 different logins for the parents. Each will be contributing their information from their 2024 tax form. So you could refer back to this later and look at it then, in case you do have a kind of a special situation. All right, how to get started. We kind of covered that. When you go to the FAFSA page, here are the 3 primary choices you have. You will either start the 2026-2027 form, and that might sound a little weird. We're in 2025. This is the form for the following academic year. The current academic year is underway. Most of the kids started in maybe their freshman year, let's say in August or September, and gosh, that would be then for their sophomore year. For those of you with 2026 grads, so we're looking ahead to the beginning next August or next September for their freshman year. You can start a new form. If you have already started it and you saved it and you want to come back, there's the edit form. And then the third one is that accept an invitation, which that's not a party, it is a form. This kind of shows how nowadays the way we want the FAFSA, they want the FAFSA to be done, is the student is going to start this, because in the eyes of the Department of Education, this is the student's form. The student is going to use their login and password. They're going to do their part of the form first. There's maybe midway through, they have an option to add or invite, hey, do you have a parent that's going to contribute? Put in their email address here. They're going to put in mom or dad's email address, then complete the rest of their form, sign it digitally. Mom or dad, whichever got invited, is going to have an email saying, hey, you've been invited to contribute. You could click through your email and go to it, or come to this page and say, yeah, I'm accepting my invitation, put in a little information, and then you can provide the parent portion of that, which will concatenate or kind of glue on to the student's information in the end and be delivered. So when we start the form and you log in, you're presented with the option, hey, I'm starting the form as and you choose the role for whichever person you are. If you're the student, of course, choose the student, or a parent, choose the parent option, and then continue on to the next page. From there, there's going to be this long kind of legalese thing that might jar you at first. But what's nice about this was a change that happened, got implemented 2 years ago. It's kind of a train wreck from a technology perspective, but all the bumps got fixed. And what this does, Department of Education server reaches out to the IRS and pulls over your tax form. And if you don't have a tax form, you're a student, you didn't file one, that's okay. It's going to understand that. But this saves us, 30 or 40 fields of data that we would otherwise have to do and type in from your 1040. So it's great. So do this. All right, you'll see this screen that the brains are thinking and the data is flowing. I did two of them today, and it took like 5 seconds, less than 10 seconds. It goes really fast, which is great. And that information is ported over. All right. When the student is going through, there's a bunch of questions that are, as it says here, personal circumstances. They're pretty unique. You see, oftentimes the answers are no through them, but just go through, check those things, see if they apply to applies to the student. There are little help bubbles next to most of the answers and most of the questions in the form. So if you're unsure what they mean, there's usually some help that clarifies it. So that's great. You'll see across the top there, there's kind of the linear progression of these are the data type questions that we're going to ask you. Personal circumstances, demographics, and so on. Those first questions are for the student, are specifically geared to figuring out, is this a dependent student? Meaning, someone is supplying more than half of their dollars to, kind of be a dependent on taxes, if you will, so to speak. They're not an independent person with their own income and assets and such. You answer those questions and it pretty quickly will tell you, yeah, this is a dependent student. This next question, this unsubsidized loan, is kind of a double negative. It's worded really poorly and can confuse a lot of families. This is essentially, hey, will your parents be providing information for you on the FAFSA? Are your students, actually, it's the opposite of that. Are your
They even
parents,
confused you.
see, it worked, guys. If the student,
The good news is now they have it. I think that
oh,
when they first did it, they had it set up as yes every time.
yes, that's
But
right.
now
I
it's
saw that.
you have to physically change it from no to yes. But anyway, sorry, go on.
No, you're exactly right. I did see that today, Dan, and that was a relief. So are the students' parents refusing to provide information? Like, no, my parent is going to be providing information. So don't get caught up as badly as I just got caught up. All right. We've made it all the way through now to the section number 4 of colleges, which is essentially where you get to list up to 20 schools. I hope you don't send applications for 20 schools because that's a lot, but maybe some families do that. So, and you can search. You type in the state the school is located in, and then the name of the school, and it's going to present that. So add all the schools that you're interested in sending this data to when the form is done. And this is how they know who to send it to, and it will be electronically sent to them. Be aware that for some of the bigger schools, and if you've seen this before, Dan, with some folks, that for the big, especially big state schools, there may be multiple listings for them. Like here's the undergraduate number, here's the graduate school program, here's the PhD program number. So, look for the undergrad for that particular institution.
Yeah, and I would also say, um, unlike the CSS that we'll get into next, that costs money. This is free. So if if you think your kid might be applying somewhere, I would list it initially. If you put the school on the FAFSA and the student never applies there, no big deal. Obviously, a bigger deal if you forget the school and then it doesn't get off to them. Plus, although after you submit it, it will take a few days to process, but then you could add more schools later. It's just, it can be kind of a headache. So if your kid's on the fence, if it was me, I would just add them the initial time you submit so you don't have to worry about logging back in.
Point. Here you see kind of a shot here where we have added in 4 different schools. They kind of get added to a list so you can peruse that and double check, make sure you got all the right schools in there. Okay, and then here's the part I was referring to earlier where you're almost to the end, you're inviting a contributor to contribute information, where you would put in then their email address, and it would send off that invitation to them. There you can see there's the little invite a parent contributor. You type in that email address and send the invitation, and then they'll get that. It happens pretty quickly. It'll show up in their email then. Yeah, you can go on to the next screen. And there you can see it was, and there's a link. I know there's a recommendation that take a screenshot of that just in case there's any problem or for some reason the email didn't get through. There's a unique code that gets created for the parent in this case. And as we showed earlier, if the email doesn't arrive for some reason, the parent can go to the FAFSA homepage and accept the invitation and just type in that code, and it'll take them right into their student's form. So it's kind of a bit of a shortcut in case something goes wrong.
Have you, I haven't lost the code yet, so I'm not sure what happens if you lose it. But yeah, definitely write down that number or whatever you have to do so you don't not have that code when you're trying to finish up the FAFSA. Again, I haven't had to troubleshoot that yet. I'm sure there's a way, but.
Okay, and then at the end there, you have the kind of the summary. Hey, here's everything kind of you typed in. You could expand each of those sections if you wanted to review the answers that were contributed, and then you go ahead and kind of sign off. Then don't forget to finish the form, both for the student and the parent. Go all the way through to the end until you get that congratulatory message. And that's that last step we're pointing out there, the signature step. There's legalese. There's a check mark saying, yes, I agree to the terms, and click the sign button. Boom, the student one is done. And it will say pending submission now. So, yep, your part's done. There's that invite code again that Dan was referring to. So you could snip it there again as well. But it says, yep, your portion is done. It's pending. Now we got to get that parent to finish their portion. And there's kind of the summary page there with setting expectations of next steps and so forth.
Now, I think we should, I feel like it doesn't, sorry, I'm just going back through here.
Yeah, that's right.
Just so we're clear, you have to do this twice. I don't know why we're not really showing that here in the slides. But basically what we've taken you through is the student going through their form and signing it. Then in essence, you're going to go back through and almost answer the same, most of similar type questions, but it's going to be kind of the same format. So you do have to do this twice through 2 different accounts, parent and student. That's where it gets confusing. A lot of people they do the student thing, they sign it and they think it's submitted, but nothing's been submitted. It's still waiting for the parent to do their part. And someone just asked the question, does the parent already have to have a FAFSA account to accept the invitation? Yes. It's the first thing you have to do. You've got to set up those accounts now because they do take a few days to be verified by Social Security before they can even be activated. And one other question was to confirm if parents are separated, only the parent who provides the majority of the child's expense fills out the FAFSA. Yes. If the parents are divorced and living separately, only the one parent who's the custodial parent, the one who provided a majority of the student's financial support, they're the one that's submitting the FAFSA. So the ex or the other parent in that situation, they're not going to be on the FAFSA anywhere. And again, the FAFSA you have to do every year for every school. The CSS profile, this is not for every school. This is for, generally speaking, your like higher priced private schools. Like the FAFSA, it's available now. If you Google CSS profile participating schools, you'll see the 200 schools that require this. But examples would be like Harvey Mudd, Colorado College, Northwestern, the Ivy League schools, and then a few public schools too, like Michigan, Virginia, North Carolina, but mostly it's in Wisconsin now, mostly your higher priced privates. This form is a lot more intense than the FAFSA. The good news is you don't need like a contributor account. You don't have to get the secure codes. You're just going to use your kid's college board account. But it's a lot more intense, a lot more detailed, and it's not free, unfortunately. So the biggest difference from a methodology standpoint in terms of how they calculate the student aid index is going to be for the home equity. Unlike the FAFSA, you do not have to report your home value on the FAFSA. You do on the CSS profile. So most schools who are utilizing this form are going to take that asset value into account when calculating your SAI, unlike the schools who only require the FAFSA. Now, another difference here for the divorced families, again, on the FAFSA, only one of, if mom and dad are divorced, neither of them are remarried, only one of those parents can submit the FAFSA. Here for the CSS profile, almost all schools that require the CSS profile also require what's called the non-custodial profile. So now if mom and dad are divorced and mom is the custodial parent, only mom's information was on the FAFSA. But if the kid's applying to Northwestern, mom's still going to do the CSS profile with only her information, but then it's going to automatically trigger the X or the father in this example to then complete the non-custodial profile form. So for those divorced families, the FAFSA schools, it may only look at one parent's income, but for the CSS, they'll still more than likely be looking at both. If the parent is unable to complete the non-custodial parent is unable to complete the CSS. Now, them, I shouldn't say unable, but them just not wanting to submit the form is not going to appease the college. You can get a non-custodial parent waiver, but to do that, you're going to have to basically prove there's no contact with the student and the parent. There might be some abuse situation. You're going to have to get like information from a third party. You know, just because the X doesn't want to fill it out, that's not going to work. So you're going to need like an airtight reason as to why the non-custodial parent cannot fill it out to see if the college will grant the waiver. So you'd be applying for that waiver through the college directly. If they don't grant you the waiver and your X doesn't fill it out, then you can't get any money. So you've got to fill out these forms to have any chance if it's required. And again, this one's much more intense, much more invasive than the FAFSA. But the good news is you use your kids' college board credentials to get in. It has nothing to do with the FAFSA website. So when you're searching for the schools, kind of like what Michael talked about earlier, I would say it's even more confusing on the CSS than the FAFSA in terms of, like here you can see we put in Cornell and there's three different options for vet school, for law school, and then for undergrad. I think Columbia is by far the most confusing because they have for every single major. But then they have for their undergrad, it's Columbia U and engineering. So like people are like, well, my kid's not applying to the engineering college, but it's considered Columbia. Anyway, very confusing. So Columbia makes it brutal, but you got to double check. Most schools, you're just going to see one pop up, but if you do see multiple, yeah, you got to be concerned about, making sure you're sending it to the undergrad school and not vet school. We get a lot of questions on this. Oh, well, they're not applying regular decision. They're applying early action. Don't worry about any of that. They're only putting that in there so that at the end of the form, it's going to tell you the deadline for the college based on how that student applied. But if you submit the CSS to Cornell regular decision and your kid actually ends up applying early decision, it's not going to have any negative impact on financial aid or anything. So, do your best to put how you think the kid's applying, but if it ends up being inaccurate, not a big deal. There's much bigger mistakes you can make, I guess I'll say. Okay, you'll notice here in the form, I think this is critical when you're filling this out. What amount is listed on line 11, adjusted gross income for NJ's 1040 required? you have to answer this question. If it says required, you have to answer it. If you try and leave it blank and click save and continue, it won't let you do it. So, but not all these questions are required. I would say that only, I don't know, a quarter of them are required, would be my guess. So, kind of as we alluded to earlier, we don't want to overshare here. Pretend you're on the witness stand for your life and you're getting cross-examined and the attorney asks you a direct question. You give them a direct answer. You don't expound on where else you were that night and who you went to dinner with, So if there's a question on here that's not required, we don't answer it. And it's not going to hurt you. So similar to, we make a note here, don't click either box if you don't want to answer this. Did you file a Schedule 1? It is not required to be answered, but once you click yes or no, you can't uncheck that box. So you would then eventually have to go with one or the other. That's just as a heads up. Okay, in terms of the income tax information, now keep in mind, you're going to have to put in, you can see that like in this example, where they're going to ask for your wages, you got to put that in right off your 1040, but the exempt interest, taxable interest, ordinary dividends, you don't have to put anything on there. Now, remember the wages, you're just taking this right off of 1Z, right off the tax return. So that's going to be, if you have a joint return, it's to include both, husband and wife income. When we get in a few sections down, they're going to ask for parent earnings, and it's going to be separated out for both parents. Then if the parent is self-employed, you would include their Schedule C income, which isn't necessarily on 1C. So it might take a little more legwork when you get to the parent earnings section, depending on if you're self-employed or just W-2 employees. And then this one, it's line 22. It's kind of confusing on your tax return because if you're self-employed, you'll notice you have self-employment tax, which is line 23, and then there's a different total in 24. But here on the CSS profile, they're looking for line 22 of the tax return for the taxes paid. If your income is below 100,000, good news is you're not going to have to pay a fee, as well as if you qualify for any of these benefits. So if you are qualifying for any of these federal benefits, you'll just check those boxes. This is not a required question, but it does help you if you qualify for these benefits. So that is a question that I would answer if you qualified for them. I would say that this is a question that a lot of people get wrong. The tax deferred pension and retirement savings plans. This is not how much is in your retirement plan. It's how much you contributed to the plan in 2024. Most common would be a 401k, but it also includes 403bs, 450, all sorts of other retirement plans. If you click on the little drop down, it would tell you all the codes. But your 401k, that's going to be on your W-2, not on your tax return. And if you do have one, it would be code D as in dog in box 12. So that's where you would find that. As well as the HSA. Again, this is confusing because it's asking you for your HSA contribution that you did at a W-2 level, but it is not asking you to include an HSA that you may have deducted on the tax return on your Schedule 1. So you got to read the fine print and see which one they're looking for here. Again, if you can click those drop down boxes and it's going to, expand kind of more details in terms of what specific line item from the W-2 or the tax return they need, or you need, I should say, when answering that question. And then other untaxed income that they're talking about here, I would say the most common would be like disability, things of that nature. Income from other family members, please don't report that. I mean, great if your family members are giving you money. If it's not being taxed, schools, college ain't going to know about it. But if you tell them here, that's going to definitely negatively impact you. So I would be careful about putting any gifts that you might be receiving from other family members in that box. And here for income change, so they're going to ask you, you're going to go through basically your whole 24 tax return, and then it's going to ask you to estimate 2025 income. Keep in mind, they're not going to ask to see your 25 tax return until the sophomore year. So if you know you're making more income in 25, you could just put it as the same as 24. They're going to find out eventually, but not until the sophomore year. The last thing you want to do is make them thinking like you're going to be super flush, more so in 25 than 24, and then give them a reason to potentially reduce your grants or your eligibility. So I would be a little concerned if I was over reporting income in 2025 compared to what was in 2024. Then it's also going to ask, do you expect a significant income change in 2026? If you say yes to that, then it's going to ask you for 2026 estimates as well. If not, or you say no, it's just going to ask for the 2025 estimates. Now, in terms of, we talked about this earlier with the FAFSA. When the parents are divorced or separated here, you're actually going to list both parents' name in the profile. And then when you say you're divorced, it's going to ask which parent provided a majority of the support. And then the second question would be, okay, which parent's information is included on this profile? If it's the same parent, then that's the normal CSS. If it's the opposite parent, then that would be the non-custodial profile. So you'll want to make sure that this matches with how you did the FAFSA. So you want the custodial parent on the FAFSA to be the same for the CSS. You don't want to switch those up. And then it's going to ask you, again, this is for parents who are divorced. Also weird that if you were divorced or separated in 2024, it won't even let you answer that in the field for some reason. Apparently people aren't allowed to be divorced in 2024, but according to the CSS profile. So just put 2023. I don't know why it doesn't work, but it doesn't. So if you try and put 24 and that was your answer and it's kicking you out, like it's like that for everybody. And then it's going to ask you some information about your ex as well. Now, listen, if you don't know your ex's address or what their job is, just put unknown. Don't guess. Tell them like, hey, I don't have any contact with this person. Tell them the real deal. So don't be afraid to say unknown if there's no contact with the ex-spouse when you're answering these couple questions. As well as if you don't think your ex is going to be helping financially for college, I'd make a little note about that here too. So obviously, if they are going to help, that's not the case. But if they're not going to, or you don't have any contact with them, don't hesitate to put that in that box. Okay, so parent asset details. Now, again, in a perfect world, I would be matching the values from the FAFSA with the CSS. If you use different values on the forms, it is possible that the school could ask for verification. Why are things different? It could create extra paperwork. So ideally, in a perfect world, the values would be the same for both the FAFSA and the CSS. You can see here, they're going to ask for your checking and savings account. They're going to ask for your investment account values. Keep in mind, this is non-retirement investment accounts. So in this section here, we are not including IRAs, 401ks, Roth IRAs, any sort of retirement accounts. It's also going to ask if you own property outside the home. If you do, you'll have to list all of those details. Same with the business, or if you own a farm. Now, key thing here, remember, for real estate businesses and farms, be honest, but don't overestimate values. I mean, I feel like any CSS I review for someone who has their own business, they overvalue their business. Now, the schools can pretty well figure out what your home is worth because they can just go on Zillow and Google it. Pretty darn hard for them to figure out what your business is worth. So try and be conservative on that question if you have a business, especially if you're like a self-proprietor or like a personal service business where there isn't a whole lot of value there. But if you have these things, you can see that then it's going to go into more detail for like a property. How many months was it rented? When was it purchased? What was the tons of detail and minutia when you say yes to these questions about the details behind that extra real estate, that business, things of that nature. So again, As you can tell, this form is far more detailed than the FAFSA form is. And then it's going to ask, this is the student section. So if the student has any investments or if they have a trust, you can see we spliced out here with the trust situation. It's going to ask all the details about the trust. Now, if the student has or if you have a custodial account for the student, a UTMA or UGMA account, that would be in the student investment section, not the parent. Also keep in mind that, any money you have in your kid's name is basically valued at 20 to 25% in this SAI formula. Any money that's in your name or the parent's name is assessed at approximately 5%. So it's much more penalizing to have the money saved in the kid's name versus your name. And remember, you're reporting those asset values as of the day you fill out this form. So if you haven't filled it out yet, you could move money from A to B to potentially reduce that SAI and increase the grants from the colleges. And then this is a great question that I would say every person I fill out a CSS asks, how'd you come up with that answer for me? How much does PEG expect to receive from the following sources to pay for education expenses next year from their parents? So to me, I think the only wrong answer you can put in this box is like 100,000 or, the full cost of school. What I try and do is come up with an extremely conservative value and enter it in based on the parents' financials. Because keep in mind too, if you put $10,000 in this box, it does not mean that NYU at $100,000 is going to read this and say, well, who cares if they make $500,000 a year? They only said they can afford 10. Let's give them a $90,000 grant. Unfortunately, they're not doing things that way, right? They're calculating what the parent can afford based on their SII formula and everything else. But, if you put 60 or 70 or 80,000 or some, high number in there, and then they don't give you very much money and you go back to them and ask and you're appealing, then they're going to maybe reference that data point that you answered on this. Like, well, you said you could afford 70,000. Why are you crying and asking for more money now? Right. So you want to use a very conservative figure here. Like a lot of answers on this form, it won't help you. It can only hurt you. This form is designed, you think, to help you, but really what it's designed to do is ask you a million questions. You get frazzled. You're up late at night trying to figure it out. You put a couple wrong answers in, and now they've got a great reason not to give you very much money. This is within that same question, the student resources question. It's also asking for scholarships and grants that you're going to receive, any employer benefits, and then money coming from relatives. If you put any numbers in these boxes, they will potentially reduce your grants dollar for dollar. So if you say grandma's giving me 10,000 bucks, kiss 10 grand and grants goodbye. They can reduce it up to dollar for dollar. So be very careful as to how you answer these questions, if you catch my drift. And then special circumstances. This is when you're going to want to tell them about every nitty-gritty thing going on in your situation, but you might not necessarily want to do that here. Reason being, let's say you put in the information about your appeal in this situation, about how you lost your job and you haven't had as much income lately or something along those lines. And then when you get the award from the school, and you go to appeal and you say, hey, I can't afford this. I told you on the CSS, I lost my job. Can I appeal? And they say, well, we already took that into account because you put it on the CSS profile. Now you don't have a leg to stand on because they've already taken it into account. You may be better off keeping that to yourself for that reason. And another reason, and that quite honestly, I don't know that they ever read this stuff in the CSS. Because if you lose your job and you're going to appeal to the school, you cannot just assume that whatever you write in this box, they are going to read. You need to do that directly with the college with their own proprietary paperwork. There's a lot bigger process that goes on there. So I think at the end of the day, you're better off keeping things to yourself, just clicking none, letting everything go through the process, getting the award, and then appealing to the university about your special circumstance that you lost your job or your high medical expenses or whatever the case may be. I just think you've got a much better shot at getting more money from the schools when you're dealing with them directly, as opposed to um, putting any information in here and assuming that they're reading it and taking it into account. Um, and then you can get supplemental just when you think you're done. There's the supplemental questions. Oh yeah, what kind of car do you drive? What year was it made? What model? It's like, oh my God, Harvard, get out of my way. Um, but almost all of these are not required questions. So it's pretty rare that I see a supplemental question that is required. So for the most part, you can probably just skip over these. The only ones that I tend to answer is some of these schools ask, is someone in your family the beneficiary of trust, or questions like along those lines. And I would just say no, if it's not the case. But for these other ones, you can go ahead and skip them. Like I said, it's pretty rare that you see a supplemental question that they require you to answer. And then the last thing that you're going to do, um, and these charges are still the same. So there's going to be a $9 registration fee, and then they're going to charge you $16 per college. So that's why I was saying, for the FAFSA, go ahead and put all the schools on there. Who cares if they don't end up applying? Not a big deal. You can't really do that here, or you can, but you're going to pay $16 a pop. So obviously, you want to double check with your kid before you're submitting this, just to make sure that you're not missing any schools, and you don't want to just submit this thing haphazardly and be paying for these fees if you don't have to. After you submit it, you'll see here there's like a little save copy. I would save a copy of it. You can save it into a PDF so you have all of your questions and answers. And then it's going to tell you, where you submitted it, and what the deadline is. Oh, sorry. One thing I will say too that gets kind of confusing is if you go back in to add a college, you do have to like add the school and kind of like go back through the whole form and repay and submit. I have had a lot of clients think that like they sent it to another school. It'll be listed in here. You'll see the college's name, but then the submission date will be blank. So they basically added it to the form, but they never went through the full process of reviewing the form again and then paying and submitting. So it never got off to that school. Now, if you do add schools, don't worry, you don't have to like fill out the form. It's already been filled out, but you have to like kind of like cycle through it, so to speak. And then iDoc is a service that most schools participate in that require the CSS profile. And then that is where you will upload your tax returns. So after they've imported the tax data in the FAFSA, after you've manually entered it in the CSS profile, and after then you've manually uploaded it to the school, they will have the tax return in so many different ways. They know exactly what's happening, right? So, but yes, it is true that most schools, after all of that, still require copies of the tax returns. So that's a very common requirement for the CSS profile schools. Hopeful. I can't believe we finished basically right on time, which is great. And we got a minute left here if there's any last minute questions, but in terms of the next steps, did you put that link in the chat for or no?
Or I will put it in right now as far as the scheduling link, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So listen, hopefully,
Yeah.
obviously this put everyone has a good idea, as kind of, or a better idea maybe, of how to fill out these forms. But there's also, we help people do, or we work with people one-on-one to submit their forms with them. And if you feel like your situation's too complicated, or you just don't want to deal with this, or you're not sure what the heck you're doing, there's a link, a free consult link that Michael just put in the chat, where you can schedule a free 15-minute consult with Michael, myself, or one of the other pros, where we can better evaluate your situation and advise you on what services that we could potentially provide to help you, if this is something that you don't feel like you can handle on your own for whatever reason. During that meeting, we'll be able to assess the situation and then give you a much better idea of how we can, or maybe how we cannot help you, depending on those nitty-gritty details. So if you're not comfortable doing this on your own, there is help out there. Just feel free to sign up for that for that meeting through the link. And then you should also be getting an email that will remind you of the link to set up the meeting, as well as the recording of this webinar tonight. So hopefully this has been helpful. But again, if you need more help or want to find out kind of how we're working with families one-on-one, feel free to set up that meeting with Michael or myself, and we will help you from there.
Nice. Woohoo, 60 minutes. That was well done, Dan.
Great timing.
That was a lot, but thank you all for taking time out of your evening to hopefully get a little clarity. Hopefully we didn't ruin your evening showing you what a pain in the rump this is, but at least it sets some expectations, give you a little bit more time to think about how to get prepared for this, or again, encouraging you to reach out, schedule a free consultation. If you have an issue we can try to help with, and tell you what kind of resources we have available to help you. We invite you to do that. So have a wonderful evening, and thanks so much for all your questions. We had a bazillion of them, so it was great.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Good night.